Islamic articles and their apologists often make very bold and high claims for themselves, such as how marriage is a sacred institution within Islam. In the previous video, examples were provided of Nikah halala, which disproves this claim. Also, there are other types of so-called marriages in Islam which proves the claim wrong, such as Nikah Mutah or temporary marriage as it's known in English. This type of marriage is prostitution all but in name, which has been legalized in Islam under the banner of marriage. Although there is a general denial amongst Sunni Muslims of its legal status, they still have to admit that it was once allowed by Muhammad and Allah. In other words, they can call it marriage or whatever they want, but prostitution was allowed in Islam for a time, no matter how brief it was enacted for. The basis for it was during a jihad expedition or holy war, when Muhammad's men came to him sexually frustrated. In Al-Hadith, a commentary of Mishkat al-Masabih, a compendium of Hadith collections from authentic books of Sunni Hadith, Volume 2, page 686, Ibn Masud is quoted as stating, "We were fighting with the Messenger of Allah and our wives were not with us. They said to Muhammad, should we castrate ourselves due to becoming unbearable for them? Muhammad forbade them from doing that, and then he allowed Mutah marriage. So they married a woman in exchange for a piece of cloth for a fixed time just to have sex with them." Notice abstention, forbearance, self-control would have been the correct instruction to give in order to build a person's spirituality and character. Instead, Muhammad allows them to fulfill their base and licentious desires by legalizing prostitution. In Sahih Bukhari 4615 it says, narrated Abdullah, "We used to participate in the holy wars carried on by the Prophet, and we had no women, i.e. wives, with us. So we said to the Prophet, shall we castrate ourselves? But the Prophet forbade us to do that, and thenceforth he allowed us to marry a woman temporarily by giving her even a garment." And then he recited Quran 587, "O you who believe, do not make unlawful the good things which Allah has made lawful for you." Mutah is an agreement between a man and a woman to have sex done by exchanging some kind of a gift. It could be as measly as a cloth, and the period could be as short as an hour, few hours, to even a day or two. There is no need for any witnesses, no ceremony, divorce or legal obligations such as inheritance. Its sole purpose is to have sexual relations with each other. This is precisely the definition of prostitution. It explains on page 49 the simplified jurisprudential encyclopedia of the Pure Sunnah that Nikah Mutah means, quote, temporary marriage. It is marriage for a specific period of time, and it is from the word enjoyment of something, benefiting from it. As its origins was instituted by Muhammad and Allah, it is still practiced and accepted by Shia Muslims, as they dismiss Sunni Hadith and some of their prominent figures such as Umar, who came to ban it outright. A project in collaboration with Columbia University, it says in the Encyclopedia Iranica, the length of a temporary marriage varies and can be as brief as an hour and does not require witnesses or registration, that the only rationale regarding the legal uniqueness of temporary marriage which distinguishes it from prostitution, despite their obvious similarities, is that any children born of temporary marriages are considered legitimate and have equal status in law with their siblings born of permanent marriages. To end the relationship, there is no official divorce pronouncement. The person only needs to rent a room or a hotel during their stay, knowing full well this is a temporary arrangement. As Shia Muslims accept the legitimacy of Mutah anyway and still practice it today, for the purposes of this video, as there is a general denial of this topic by the majority of Sunni Muslims, examples will be shown from their highest sources which will demonstrate its acceptance and Islamic legitimacy. For example, in Sahih Bukhari 5117-5118, narrated Jabir bin Abdullah and Salama ibn al-Aqwa, while we were in an army, Allah's Messenger came to us and said, "You have been allowed to do the mut'ah, temporary marriage, so do it." In Sahih Muslim 1405, Jabir ibn Abdullah and Salama ibn al-Aqwa said, "There came to us the proclaimer of Allah's Messenger and said, Allah's Messenger has granted you permission to benefit yourselves, i.e., to contract temporary marriage with women." This means Sunni Muslims cannot abdicate responsibility. It is not just a Shia issue, rather it is an Islam issue, as Muhammad allowed prostitution. Although Sunni Muslims will be quick to claim Nikah Mutah was eventually made forbidden and that it is a Shia Muslim problem now, in reality it is not. It is still an Islam and Muhammad problem. Sunni Muslims will often quote hadith such as this one in Sahih Bukhari 6961 for its prohibition, that the practice was banned on the day of Khaybar, which occurred in 629. And according to Sahih Muslim 1406, it was allowed in the early days of Islam, which started around 610. This means Mutah was allowed for most of Muhammad's prophethood. It is interesting to note why Khaybar may have been mentioned for the time of his prohibition. It could perhaps have something to do with the point that it was during Khaybar when Muhammad was poisoned. Subsequently he fell ill and died 3 years later, which means only towards the end of his life, when he became ill and infirm, it was supposedly banned. Here the word supposedly is used because even then it is not so clear-cut, as it continued to be practiced. Still, based upon the hadith in Sahih Bukhari 6961, it says, "The marriage is valid, but its condition is illegal." So today, the Hanafi school of Sunni jurisprudence, who are the largest group of Sunni Muslims in the world, argue the Nikah Mutah contract is valid, but as marriage is regarded as a permanent condition, it is the temporary element of the contract that makes it void. Here, in the explanation of the hadith, a major Hanafi jurist, Imam Zufar, is quoted as permitting it, albeit the condition being invalid. As it says in Ibn Majah, it was Umar, not Allah via the Quran or Muhammad, that explicitly banned the practice once and for all, according to Sunni Muslims. In Sahih al-Bukhari 5119, Muhammad said, "If a man and a woman agree mutah, pleasure, it should last for 3 nights, and if they like to continue, they can do so, and if they want to separate, they can do so." The narrator Salama bin al-Aqwa said, "I do not know whether that was only for us or for all the people in general." Abu Abdullah al-Bukhari said, "Ali made it clear that the Prophet said the mutah has been cancelled, made unlawful." However, this is a third-hand claim from Abdullah, as there are other sources that suggest Ali disagreed with its banning. This will be evidenced later on in the video. So what all this shows is that Muhammad and his companions practiced it, then forbade it after allowing it again. This is evidenced in Sahih Muslim 1405, where Mutah was practiced in Muhammad's time and also after him during the caliphate of Abu Bakr and Umar's time. Umar reigned during the period of 634 to 644. Muhammad died in 632. So the practice continued well after the life of Muhammad and Abu Bakr. This was purportedly the best generation of Muslims, but they are the ones who practice prostitution. The other problem with claiming it is prohibited by the Sunni Muslims is that there is not a single verse from the Quran that explicitly forbids it. However, on the contrary, Quran 424 seems to allow it. For any Muslim, Sunni or Shia, the Quran should be the highest source of guidance rather than the Hadith. Therefore, it cannot supersede it, which is why Shia Muslims still practice it today, who reject Sunni Hadith sources. Meaning the irony for Sunni Muslims is Allah, the high authority, allows it, even if the lesser source in the form of Hadith forbids it, with Muhammad allowing it, then disallowing it, eventually leading Umar, not Muhammad, to ban it outright. So as much as Sunni Muslims want to distance themselves from Mutah, they cannot do so because the Quran says, so for whatever you enjoy from them, give them their due compensation as an obligation, and there is no blame upon you for what you mutually agree to beyond the obligation. In Tafsir Ibn Kathir, it confirms the word from the verse Quran 424, istamta'tum, is derived from the root word mutah, which literally means enjoy or pleasure, but generally used for temporary marriage, as sex is implied as the pleasure or to benefit from. Ibn Kathir goes on to say about Quran 424, the generality of this verse has been used as evidence for temporary marriage, mutah. So here is a situation where the Quran, even according to Sunni Muslims, shows that it is validating its practice. There is not another verse found to abrogate it. Other Sunni Quran commentaries confirm the verse is about Mutah, such as Tafsir al-Qurtubi on Quran 424 says, quote, Abu Umar said, scholars, whether the early or later ones, did not disagree that Mutah marriage was allowed for a period of time, and there is no inheritance, and the difference is, when the time is ended, no divorce is required, end quote. In Tafsir al-Baydawi, in his interpretation of the Quranic Mutah verse, says the contractual marriage is about the temporary Mutah marriage, which is the mere pleasure of sexual intercourse with a woman and her own enjoyment in what she has given. The words in the bracket are the direct Quranic verses translated. An earlier hadith was cited from Sahih al-Bukhari 4615. Here it is again. It was in connection to Mutah, whereby Muhammad recited Quran 587 to say, O you who believe, do not make unlawful the good things which Allah has made lawful for you. He could only have said this if there was already a verse from the Quran allowing such a practice. Quran 424 must be the verse he is referring to. Most classical Sunni Muslim commentators agree and say it is about Mutah marriage. Continuing the theme of quoting from Sunni Muslim Quran commentators, in Tafsir Jalalain it says, such wives as you enjoy thereby and have had sexual intercourse with, give them their wages, the dowries that you have assigned them as an obligation. You are not at fault in agreeing together, you and they, after the obligation is waived, decreased or increased. In order to mitigate the situation, the translation uses the word wives in explaining these women who the men are having sexual intercourse with, who are to give them their wage. There is no mention of the word wives, nor marriage in the original Quranic Arabic text, nor the word dowry. Even if it is implied because of the temporary marriage aspect, there is no love, companionship, or longevity in the relationship, just wages in return for sexual intercourse. In Tafsir Ibn Abbas, it says, in relation to making lawful to you marriage for an agreed limited period of time, in later making this practice unlawful, it is also said that this means Allah is ever knower of your compulsion for marriage for an agreed limited period of time, hence admitting this is about Mutah. So both Shia and Sunni Muslims agree it was permitted. They only disagree on the reasons why it was permitted and whether it can still continue today. In the Shia article, it quotes the aforementioned Quran verse for its ongoing legitimacy, and the translation is more accurate than the Sunni sources. At least it could be argued, in the case of Mutah, the Shias are more consistent and are sticking to the truer form of Islam by practicing Quranic teaching rather than allowing the lesser hadith source to abrogate it. It also admits Mutah literally means pleasure, which comes from the Quranic word istamtatum, the 10th verbal root for the word Mutah, something that Sunni Muslims agree with, as shown in Corpus Quran, a lexicography of Quranic words. As shown earlier, the marriage, if it can actually be called that, could be an hour to a day or more, and the relationship or marriage is called off after a set time. It is a private and verbal temporary contract where the man and the woman agree for a fee to have sex for a set period of time. The website explains Mutah, quote, in some works, a special term is applied to women who participate in Mutah, mustajara, or rented woman. Going on to say Mutah is considered a kind of rental because in general a man's basic aim in this kind of marriage is the sexual enjoyment of a woman, and in return for his enjoyment the woman receives a certain amount of property or money. To any objective person, Mutah is evidently prostitution, thereby adultery if done without the wife's foreknowledge. Even the Caliph Ali recognized that, although he failed to see the distinction between Mutah and adultery. He said because of Mutah, adultery will never happen. For example, in Tafsir al-Kabir by Ar-Razi, after quoting early Muslim Quran commentator and historian at-Tabari, Ali is quoted as having said, had Umar not banned Mutah, then the only person to fornicate would be a wretched person. In an even earlier hadith collection found in Musannaf Abdul Razak, hadith 14029, Ibn Jurayj said he believed Ali mentioning if it were not for Umar forbidding it, or Umar having said no one would commit fornication except the wretched. In effect, what is being said by Ali is two main things. Number one, Umar forbade the practice, but does he really have the authority to ban something Allah and Muhammad allowed? Seeing the iniquity and shame, Umar probably banned it, realizing that it was no different from prostitution. So it seems Umar has a higher moral standard than Allah and Muhammad. Number two, as Mutah is essentially legalized fornication and prostitution practiced by Muhammad and his companions and those after them, what Ali is saying is Mutah, due to its legal status in Islam, no one should now commit adultery unless they are truly wretched. Notice none of the classical sources are Shia. They are all from reputable Sunni sources. Continuing with the theme of citing only from Sunni sources on Mutah, in Zad al-Ma'ad, Volume 2, page 190, when Muhammad's companion Urwa asked Ibn Abbas, the same Ibn Abbas who was Muhammad's uncle, why he permitted Mutah, Ibn Abbas responded by saying he should ask his mother. This is because Urwa was born from a Mutah marriage. His mother was none other than the daughter of Abu Bakr, Islam's first caliph according to Sunni Muslims. Abu Bakr was also Muhammad's close companion and father of Aisha, Muhammad's child wife. This shows how senior companions of Islam were born out of Mutah. And secondly, not everyone followed Umar's prohibition of Mutah, including Muhammad's uncle Ibn Abbas, who disregarded it, and seems like he continued the practice. Further evidence of this is found in other Sunni sources, such as in al-Zarqani's explanation of Muwatta Malik. It says in volume 3, page 230, permissibility of Mutah was proven from a group of the companions, such as Jabir, Ibn Masud, Abu Sa'id, Muawiyah, Asma bint Abu Bakr, Ibn Abbas, Amr ibn al-Huwayrith, Salama, and from a group of the subsequent followers. And it was answered that the disagreement was only in the early period until the end of the caliphate of Umar, and the consensus is only after that, and there was disagreement as to whether Ibn Abbas returned to the prohibition or not. Ibn Abdul Barr said, his, Ibn Abbas's companions from Mecca and Yemen consider it permissible. In this website, validated by some of Saudi Arabia's most senior contemporary scholars, as posted on their website, in their commentary of a hadith found in Sahih Muslim 1405 in its complete and unabridged form, it says Jabir bin Abdullah continued this practice of Mutah until Umar banned it during his caliphate. It says Jabir bin Abdullah tells us that they used to marry women for pleasure and to fulfill their desire, and that was permissible. But then the Prophet forbade it. The shameful point of this relationship is when they craved intimacy, they would mutually agree a handful of dates and flour as charity or as a gift from the man who would give a dowry or gift to the woman, a small amount like a piece of food. Jabir reported that they continued to do that while the Prophet was present among them. Then when the Messenger of Allah died, they did Mutah during the Caliphate of Abu Bakr until Umar, who forbade it during his Caliphate. In the commentary of Sahih Bukhari by Imam Al-Aini, volume 17, page 246, it repeats the same account. The classical scholar Abdul Razak, in his Musannaf, volume 7, page 496, hadith number 14020, described how early Muslim Sa'id ibn Jubair, who lived decades after Muhammad, Abu Bakr and Umar, frequently visited a woman in Mecca for sexual intercourse. When asked about this, he said he had a contract of Nikah Mutah with her, and seeing her was, quote unquote, more halal or permissible than drinking water. To illustrate that Mutah still happens today, in an investigation into sexual exploitation of children and young women by clerics in Iraq, a BBC documentary called Undercover with the Clerics, Iraq's Secret Sex Trade. A short clip will be shown next, but the full documentary is on BBC iPlayer. Within it, undercover journalists caught clerics offering Mutah or pleasure marriages to girls as young as 9, when men were paying a dowry for a temporary wife. The report found most of the clerics that were approached were willing to carry out such a marriage, including catching one conducting a marriage ceremony with a 13-year-old. The Daily Mail wrote a report about it on the 15th of October 2019, saying women had been trapped into prostitution and pimped out by the religious elite. One young widow alleged that a cleric sold her to his friends in a prostitution ring, while secret filming revealed another cleric conducting a pleasure marriage with a girl aged 13. In Karbala, Iraq's most important religious city, the undercover reporter is introduced to a cleric who claims pleasure marriage with a child is halal or permissible. He says to her, 9 years old, plus there's no problem. Footage showed him explaining, it's up to you how you want to do it. She's permitted to you. You're allowed to perform from behind. Do what you desire. Muslims, Shia or Sunni, to their horror, have petitioned to remove such video clips from the internet and from other media platforms. And as shocking as this sounds, including to Muslims, but they have to understand that it was not Muhammad nor Allah that stopped people from doing these heinous acts. These clerics believe what they were doing is Islamically legitimate precisely because Allah and Muhammad allowed it. Therefore, for them, it was made Islamically legal. Hence, Muslims have no right to petition against the video. If anything, they should be petitioning and protesting about the teachings of Muhammad, Allah and Islam, not at the video which exposes the religion.
I have to be discreet filming this, but we're here to investigate allegations that some of the clerics here are grooming women for halal prostitution and even acting like pimps.
سيدنا اخبارك ان شاء الله بخير. على السلامه اغاتي. يعني نص ساعه شنو صار عندك شغله صار عندك شيء بالضبط عندك يوم كامل ترتاح بالضبط. ما في حدا خاف تاخذ وجهها مداعبه. انا اقول لك مداعبه يعني تتماصص وياها تفرك بجسمها بصدرها عادي. الله يسلمك. خدمتكم انا تفضل يا توي.
انه البنيه اذا عمرها صغير ماكو مشكله.
ماكو مشكله. 9 سنوات فوق ماكو مشكله. مداعبه هو فقط مداعبه وعدم الدخول. عدم الدخول بس ما يعني لا تدخل بهم كل شيء.
So in conclusion, in Islam, prostitution is allowed, though it is falsely translated as temporary marriage, or in the Arabic, Nikah Mutah, which means pleasure or benefit marriage. But in reality, it is no marriage at all. The woman the man marries is not really a wife in the true sense. It is not based on love or a lasting relationship. There is no ceremony or service, no any witnesses, or anything registered officially. The only requirement is a verbal agreement between the two specifying how long they will be together to have sex. It could be even for an hour. All the man needs to do is give her what she demands, then the contract is binding. If the girl is young, clerics or their parents act as pimps on their behalf. This is quite clearly permissibility of prostitution legalized by Muhammad and the Quran. Muhammad himself, his companions, and many so-called pious Muslims continued to practice it long after its supposed ban many years later. In short, instead of teaching abstention, thereby building a person's character and righteousness by way of patience and self-control, Muhammad and Allah allowed Muslims to fulfill their base desires by legalizing prostitution. Even if the Sunni Muslims say it was eventually prohibited, although evidence shows it remained in place during most of Muhammad's prophethood until Khaybar, when he was poisoned and subsequently died. It was practiced during Abu Bakr's caliphate and also during most of Umar's caliphate until he eventually banned it outright. It is here that these Sunni Muslims often point their fingers at Shia Muslims who continue to practice it today, but they cannot claim the moral high ground as the Quran seemingly institutes it, as confirmed by many of their classical scholars. Furthermore, they cannot point any fingers at anyone because Muhammad and his companions practiced it, and some of their revered figures were born out of Mutah. It is taken for granted Shia Muslims practice it until modern times, because they believe the secondary source of hadith can never abrogate the primary source, that is the Quran, and certainly not Umar. So they continue to practice it today. The appalling consequence of this is evident as shown in a recent documentary video. In the next video, evidence will be shown how Sunni Muslims still continue to practice Mutah, albeit they have just changed the name and a few minor variables. Essentially, it remains the same.